what are emotions actually? What do you mean? How do you feel? The first time somebody asked me, how do you feel? I got very angry. And they said, well, that's a feeling, anger. You can be angry. And I was like, okay, all right, so I'm angry then. Great. I was 40 years old at that point.
Some of the stuff that you've written, what you call growing up in a highly controlled religious environment. And some of the things that you said, in my research, I've read that religious trauma may include depression, grief, anxiety, underdeveloped critical thinking, difficulty making decisions, underdeveloped social skills, black and white thinking, substance abuse, sexual difficulties, feelings of not belonging, difficulty relating to people, lack of knowledge about current social issues, loss of community, sense of loss of identity, low self-esteem. What of those things did you experience?
Well, it's more like a jackpot in that list, I got all of those.
Hi, and welcome back to this episode of The Gifts of Trauma from Compassionate Inquiry. My name is Kevin Young, and in this episode of The Gifts of Trauma, I'm speaking to Joakim Appell. And before we listen to the conversation, I just wanted to let you know that Joakim and I have a conversation about some really deep topics that are very personal to Joakim. And we will cover things such as suicide ideation, drug addiction, living in a very controlling religious community. And Joakim shares some other stuff that may be triggering, may be quite emotional for some people. Just to let you know that before we tune in. It's a very, very deep and beautiful conversation. I enjoyed having it. I hope you enjoy listening to it. Take care. Thank you for joining us on The Gifts of Trauma from Compassionate Inquiry. Thank you, Joakim. Thank you for being here. I'm really delighted to have you as a guest on the Gifts of Trauma podcast from Compassionate Inquiry. Yeah, personally, from a personal perspective, I'm really excited to be having this conversation because you and I have, I think it's fair to say, struck up a beautiful working relationship, well, from my point of view anyway, and an interesting friendship. And I'm really keen to get to know more about you. So you're very welcome, and I'm delighted you're here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Let's start with this. I would love to hear your story and how I would like to build the conversation whilst keeping as much space as the conversation requires. Is I'm going to start and ask you to talk a little bit about yourself presently, who you are, what you do. And then I would love to take you right back and bring you through your life experience and see how that trajectory, how that path landed you here today with me on the Gifts of Trauma podcast, talking about yourself and the work that you do. Does that sound okay?
Sounds good.
Thank you. So then why don't you, in your own words, and however you want to do it, describe who you are.
Yeah, so I am a compassionate inquiry practitioner, a mentor, and a professional short course leader, and a circle leader in the compassionate inquiry. That's one part, or a couple of parts. And I have, with my wife, a private practice called Compassion Therapy. And presently I'm working with just started a new interesting project with a substance to get people off opiate addictions in collaboration with some old foxes from the Swedish recovery community, I would say, or the government's recovery community. So it's all through psychiatrists. So that's very, very interesting. They have a very similar approach to what we have in compassionate inquiry, or when Gabor speaks about addiction. So that's very interesting.
Could I ask a couple of questions about that, Joakim? Because it sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
I love how you described a couple of old foxes from the recovery community and the Swedish government, and the similarities between that program that you're doing and compassionate inquiry. Tell me more about that. So tell me more about how you got involved, what it entails, the impact that it's having on people. I think I'm particularly interested in too.
Yeah, I mean, it ties together with my own experience of compassionate inquiry, actually, a lot. So it's people with opiate addictions, and it's how to cut down, and you go 10% at a time. It's well, as they describe it, these kind of old school psychiatrists, they describe, yeah, well, the connection and the relationship in this process is what's important. Like the 10%, yeah, that's something, but what helps people through that is, that someone is there listening to them, talking to them, asking them, and how to build that relationship. And then they talk about, yeah, in the body it happens this, and in the brain this, and they go on and on and on about what happens in the body physically from a kind of a medical point of view. But they're also very much bringing in compassion, and people are left in power, how much to cut down each time, and how long time they want to be on that. And so it's all about the clients deciding. So the power is all with them, which is also very compassionate inquiry-esque, I suppose. To all, the client is always in focus, and whatever they need, whatever they want to share, they keep their drugs. So they are in power. They can, okay. There's not, in Sweden there is a lot of, you will put people on the minimum amount for them to kind of survive. But this approach is more, we're going to put you on a level that makes you feel okay. So, you don't have to suffer while you go through it. So you can live a normal life whilst you do it, and you don't have to go and look for the drugs. Like, so you get them as from the system, basically.
Yeah, maybe a prescription or, yeah. I'm kind of fascinated already, Joakim, and we're barely into our conversation. Talk to me. You said a couple of things. You said, build the relationship, and compassion and empowerment. Talk to me about how building the relationship, compassion and empowerment helps the client or the end user. What does that do for them?
I mean, when you get to choose what you're gonna do, I mean, most people who have been living with addictions for any period of time, they don't really want to be living with addiction. So and they know that it's dangerous. They know that it's bad for their health. They know that it's a stigmatized kind of way of existing, and they all know that. So nobody needs to point that out. Like, you don't have to tell them, oh, this is bad for you. Like, they know. So to just treat people like another human. There's a human and a human talking. There is no, oh, here's this drug addict or this junkie. And no, it's just like, well, how do you feel? What's going on? What's your day like? And without judgment. It creates safety, to be honest also. But so if you have somebody who is in a complicated addiction with a variety of drugs, to have them be honest about what they take to you, it's like that's one of the cornerstones in this approach, that these psychiatrist people it's very tricky to get somebody in active addiction to be totally honest about what they're taking and not. In order to make that happen, you need to provide that space, that it's okay. Whatever happens, it's okay. Okay, you took some more that day. That's okay. Don't worry about it. To create that safety for people to actually allow themselves to be honest.
Tell me more about that. Tell me more about building safety, which allows people to be honest. How does that happen?
Well, that's my part in this lovely, I wouldn't call it a program yet, but these two guys have been doing that for a long time. But I'm new into the team, maybe, or to one of the teams. So for me, it's about being myself and being honest. Because I have a background living with a long-term drug addiction. So and it's the same, it's very much the same basis as what we do in compassionate inquiry. We're not walking into a compassionate inquiry session we're not putting on the therapist hat or the therapist glasses or the coat or we're pretty much ourselves. And well, I should talk about myself, but I believe that I think I don't think anybody would disagree with that, to be fair. I mean, to the main part, we're just ourselves and we're present in this moment. And if something comes up for us, then we're very careful to distinguish that this is mine or this is somebody else's, and there is no judgment and there's a lot of curiosity, and all of the qualities in compassionate inquiry are used in these relations. Yeah.
How then are people responding to you when you bring compassionate inquiry into that? Because you mentioned, safety, non-judgment, non-hierarchical, meeting people as people. Third level of compassion that Gabor talks about is compassion of recognition. And you've talked about you're recognizing that you're really no different from these people. You mentioned, and we'll talk about that, in a while, if that's okay, that you have a history of a long-term drug addiction. How do people, in your experience, how do people respond to all those qualities that a compassionate inquiry practitioner brings? Or how do they respond to you?
I mean, it's a pretty overwhelming response for me as a professional, I suppose. I don't even like to say that I'm a professional there because I'm very much myself, but in a professional sense, then people are open, and I mean, the time varies, of course. Sometimes it takes a couple of meetings or 10 meetings, and sometimes it's quick, but there is always a positive response that I'm not trying to tell them what to do. I'm not trying to fix them. I'm just listening. And I have in this specific project, I have these amazing kind of tools in terms of harm reduction to offer. I mean, it's an overwhelmingly positive response, somebody who's just being a human, who can actually offer them something that they know that will help them. So I don't have to come, oh, this might work. They know what it is, and they get it. And so the non-judgmental part is important, and to listen.
Yeah, it really sounds to me like you're giving people autonomy and responsibility for themselves. You're empowering them, that word you used earlier, whilst supporting them through that process as well. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. I know it's something that you've shared a couple of times, that I've heard you share in a variety of places, about you working with some human with an addiction who kept relapsing, and you were kind of asking for advice, and you got the advice. I think it was from Gabor. It was in a masterclass, I think, and at the end of it, you just got to keep doing what you're doing. You just got to keep loving him, and that might sound I don't know, maybe it sounds like a cliche or something, but that's the truth of it. You just got to keep loving people.
Yeah, that I just noticed that made me quite emotional hearing you tell that story, and it really sticks with me, that piece of advice that Gabor gave me. Yeah, just keep loving him. Yeah, unconditional love, and yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. I'm going to segue just a little bit, Joakim, if that's okay, because as I sit here talking to you and you're describing the work that you do, that sounds really profound and progressive and advanced, and we're talking about, I just mentioned unconditional love, and we're talking about non-judgment, and we're talking about empowerment. How is it for you to sit in those environments, sit where you are right now and think, not that long ago, I was in the other chair? How is that experience for you?
I mean, it's one of gratitude, to be fair. Like I also have, I feel the gratitude tears kind of raising up and down here behind my eyes. And I mean, that's to bring it into how I found compassionate inquiry, perhaps.
Beautiful. Please, if that's where you want to go there.
Yeah, so it's I went into a rehab facility in 2019, November 2019, after having been on substances, drugs and alcohol, almost non-stop for for about 24 years. A lot of the part for like a very heavy kind of consumer or a party consumer, as I would have described it, but the party was kind of always 7 days a week kind of thing, but in my mind. And as I came in there, I spent about a month in there, and somebody gave me one of Gabor Mate's books, in the realms of hungry ghosts, encounters with addiction. It was like a 12-step slash therapy kind of rehab facility. So there was a lot of 12-step meetings, and they all start with God grant me the serenity, and all of this stuff. And that had me freak out completely, the word God, because I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, or inside the Jehovah's Witnesses. So that it had me more or less leave the room. Every time they mentioned God, it was just like like my body just closed. And I couldn't talk about it. I just was like, no, well, these people are, I don't want to, no, I'm not going to participate in this. It closed me off. So I got that book, and, I kind of stayed, but it was like a violent resistance inside of me to the concept of God, let's say. So opening that book, and I just read and read and read and read and read it, basically in one go, in 2 days. And there is a question there at some point. I think it's in chapter 6 maybe, and it's what do you get from your addiction? What's good about it? What's the point of it? Why do you do it? And that question, so that started me thinking.
Joakim, could I pause you just on that, if that's okay? Because I think that's a really important thing, because that's for anyone living with addiction, or living with someone else with addiction, or who has maybe recovered from an addiction, and there may still be some shame or blame or self-anger. I want to talk to you as well a little bit about forgiveness in a while.
Yeah.
So the question that you read in Gabor's book was not, list all the things how this addiction is destructive, or list all the ways that it's harming you, or tell us all the bad things that this addiction does in your life. Quite often, people in addiction, they're being asked to consider the impact on their family, and that they can't see their children, and all the negative sides, if you like, of addiction. And that question that you just said from Gabor was, what is this addiction doing for you? How does it help? How does it serve? What do you get from it?
Yeah.
And that is a really different approach to, look what you're doing to yourself and your family. You're destroying everyone, etc., 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 that we quite often hear when working with people in active addiction. So sorry, I interrupt. I just thought it was really important to highlight that question. What is this addiction doing for you?
And it's exactly like you say. I've been there for about a month. I've written a list of the 10 worst things that I ever did, etc., etc., and I did all that, in that month, and bringing all the very negative things up. So I was in a place of shame and guilt, and it was a very heavy, those first 30 days. This is like a detox. So the first 2 weeks you don't do that much, but then you start listing all the bad stuff, all the negative consequences, and so on, how much money you spent, and all of this kind of, who did you hurt, and lists of nasty things, essentially. And then they also come around with God, which kind of had me freak out. So coming to that question in that book, that made me stop, and I started thinking, I had other people copying my step 2, for example, step 1 and step 2 and step 3. Other people in that rehab were like, these exercises. And it's like, yeah, just copy mine, like that was not fully hearted, basically. But that made me think back, when did I start taking drugs? What kind of position was I in? And yeah, I grew up inside of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I mean, it's essentially a doomsday sect. They're waiting for Armageddon to come any given moment, and when it does, everybody else except Jehovah's Witnesses are gonna die. And growing up in that community, knowing only that when I started school at 7 years old, I was convinced that this is the truth. Like this is how it's gonna be. And I mean, the amount of fear that's created in that environment for a child is, I don't know. Yeah, maybe we'll come back to that. But
Hmm.
so being inside of that, and that's also to do with the fear of God, and my terror of the word God, actually, because God is the one who's going to judge you. God sees everything, and your intentions and your thoughts and so on. But anyway, so as I left Jehovah's Witnesses at between 15 and 16. I got baptized at 15 because I thought that would be the right path to be on. Like this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to hand myself over to God through a baptism, and I did that in front of about three or 4,000 people in a big, I don't know what this, a convention is the word, uh, and hoping that like it was gonna set me on the straight path, or that I'll be on the right path at least. But I came up from that kind of little pool, and I had a full-on panic attack. I didn't realize that at the time, but I was just shaking, and it's just like, and my whole system was just screaming, "What did you do now? Like, no, why did you do that? Don't, this is no, like." And I could just like, it took me a few days to calm down from that experience, and then I started I don't know what you call it, high school, maybe what you do when you're after the elementary school or whatever.
Sure.
And I met a girl out drinking, and one thing led to the other, and etc. And this is against the rules of Jehovah's Witnesses to have any kind of sexual contact with anybody before you're married. So that happened, and I felt horrible, like really, really bad. Like a lot of anxiety, and that I've committed a sin that is serious enough for me to not be able to survive Armageddon. That was the conviction. And so I went to the kind of elderlies in the congregation, and I told them, like I did this, and I'm really sorry, and I feel terrible, and so on and so on. And I was met with a very odd attitude, like, yeah, well, that's not a surprise coming from you, kind of thing. And there was no compassion, I suppose. It was a compassion-free interaction. And they gave me these kind of restrictions that you get if you break the rules there. Then you have these, you can't raise your hand in the meetings and reply, and you can't go and knock on people's doors, or be of service, like. So I quit the school, the high school, and I stayed home, literally in my bed for about 6 months, kind of repenting, and crying, and praying, and I was kind of waiting for something to happen, to the sense of forgiveness, or that I've repented enough, or I've regretted this enough. Now can I move on? But it never came. It just got worse and worse and worse. So after about 6 months, I realized that, or actually I told myself this. So I realized that this is not working. How long am I supposed to be in this state? So I told myself, hey, Joakim, you're a 16-year-old or 15-year-old kid. Like, well, you did what every other 15-year-old boy in the whole universe wants to do. You met a girl, and you, etc. You kissed her, da, da, da. I mean, it's not an unnatural thing to want to do. It's really a normal thing. Everybody wants to do that. And as I was saying to myself, that's not so bad. Then it just started to shift immediately. As soon as I realized that it's not that bad, it's okay. It was actually a normal thing to do.
Could I pause you there, Joachim, just as you're taking a breath? I'm fascinated by your story, so we'll come back to that. But what I've just heard you say, which is really fascinating, is that you were waiting for forgiveness to arrive
Mm.
and it didn't. And then you went on to describe how it did. which
Yeah.
is really fascinating to me. But it didn't come from some external deity or God, as you're putting it. It actually came from within, from yourself.
So when I realized that this is about me and this is about how I feel, it's not an external thing. This is me. This is internal. That really pissed me off. I was so angry. So I walked back to and I set up a meeting with these elderlies, and I literally told them to buzz off. And I walked out of there angry. And yeah, that's how I left the Jehovah's Witnesses. Around 3 months after that. So what happens when you leave Jehovah's Witnesses? That you lose all your friends. Some people lose all their families, and your whole sense of purpose, all your belonging disappear because I grew up there. I only knew people well that were also Jehovah's Witnesses. So all these people disappeared, and I was kind of alone. My mom never disowned me. In some families that happens, but that was not the case for me. And it was in that movement that I tried Class A drugs for the first time.
You and I both know what Class A drugs are. So we have experience of talking about Class A's. For our listeners, what are they? What are we talking about when we say Class A?
Well, I believe it's in the UK, they call it that, I suppose. So it's cocaine, amphetamine, heroin, methamphetamine.
Ecstasy, MDMA,
I think they put LSD and mushrooms in that category also.
ketamine. Okay.
Everything that's not weed, you could say.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Joakim, before you tell the rest of the story, could we pause at 16 and you're about to talk about that was the first time I tried Class A drugs. And I want to go backwards first, if that's okay. Even further than what you've talked about. You talked about living in a community, and you talked about fear for a child, fear of God, fear of the community. You talked about this sin that you committed by dating a girl was serious enough not to survive. And what I hear, the theme or the undercurrent there is fear. And I wonder, when was the first time you remember experiencing fear because of your upbringing, the community, the family that you lived in?
I mean, that I can recall is from 5 and 6. Realizing sitting in the Kingdom Hall, which is the church or whatever, the church building of Jehovah's Witnesses, realizing that God can read my mind. So if I just think something naughty, God already knows. So it's like at age 5 or 6, somewhere around there. Like, so if I'm walking around in the local corner shop and I'm thinking, oh, I want that Snickers. If I'm contemplating taking the Snickers, putting it in my pocket, that's already a sin. And that freaked me out, even as a young child. And it was just like, okay, so I can't think about these things then.
So tell me more about it. That freaked me out. How was it to live with this fear that your mind could be read, everything that you were thinking was being seen? How was that for a child to live with that fear?
Well, terrifying.
Hmm.
So what I did was to push it all down. Everything, every emotion could eventually lead you in a very dangerous path. I mean, I wasn't conscious of this at the time, but this is what I've discovered with the help of compassionate inquiry, mainly. That I can operate from this space here in a very cognitive way, and I know what people expect from me, what I should answer, what is a normal thing to answer, how much sympathy shall I show. For a long time in my life, I thought I was some kind of a weird sociopath kind of person, because somebody would tell me, oh, my dog died, and I would know, yeah, well, so they're going to be upset now. Oh, but I could never feel.
Ah.
I was never in touch with those feelings, and so at that time, with that fear, the 5, 6 year olds terror rather than fear of God just watching me all the time. So let's push all this down and respond with your mind, because then you can control what you're saying and what you're doing.
I looked at some of the stuff that you've written around living in what you call growing up in a highly controlled religious environment.
Mm.
And some of the things that you said, in my research, I've read that religious trauma may include depression, grief, anxiety, underdeveloped critical thinking, difficulty making decisions, underdeveloped social skills, black and white thinking, substance abuse, sexual difficulties, feelings of not belonging, difficulty relating to people, lack of knowledge about current social issues, loss of community, sense of loss of identity, low self-esteem. What of those things did you experience?
Well, it's more like a jackpot in that list, you know. I got all of those, you know, to some degree, you know.
Tell me a little bit about those, if you're happy enough to. So
Yeah.
those moments, going through those moments of all of those things that we've listed.
Well, I would need the list, I think.
I'll read them to you. I'll read some of them again.
Yeah.
Depression, grief, anxiety, underdeveloped critical thinking, difficulty making decisions, underdeveloped social skills, black and white thinking, substance abuse. We're beginning to talk about that. Sexual difficulties, feelings of not belonging.
Can go with that. I mean, feelings of not belonging. It's the first time that I actually felt that I belonged anywhere without substances. I spent my whole life not belonging, you know, coming from a society or a community within society, like they're a pretty closed community, Jehovah's Witnesses. And then watching the society from that perspective, you know, like they're saying that the world is pretty bad and there's wars and this and that and so on. And it's kind of true, you know, like the world doesn't look that great sometimes, you know, there's nice views to have as well. But if you look at the wars and the famines and the weather and, you know, it can look nasty, right? So it's kind of supported that. So I didn't want to be, in my mind, I made up the narrative, then I don't want to be a part. I don't want that. You know, you ask me to vote. Why? You know, I don't even want to be a part of it. So that kept me also on the outside. But it also made me not belong anywhere, which is a very lonely space. Maybe the only one that doesn't fit on me there is the social, what's that one? The social underdeveloped social skills.
Underdeveloped social skills, yeah.
I mean, I think that was probably a bit of a savior for me, along with substances, that I had you know, I connected with people, and I was always interested in people, and I wanted to hear their, you know, what's going on, why are you doing that, where are you coming from, and how come this and how come that, and I was happy to also share where I came from a lot in the beginning, and that kind of curiosity it's always been there. It's also a part of why I started to question their narrative. It's like, well, they're saying this and such and no, you know, I can't see how that's possible. And asking questions, and being curious. So what else do you have on your list? On my list?
Yeah, on your list, yeah. Depression, grief, anxiety, loss of community, sense of loss of identity, low self-esteem.
Yeah.
Any of those ring true for you?
Yeah, I mean, so the loss of identity and the low self-esteem and, you know, feeling lost in the world as you lose your purpose. You know, you have inside of an organization like Jehovah's Witnesses there's a lot of organizations that are built up in the same kind of way. You have a purpose, you do have belonging, and you have a very clear purpose. Usually the world is pretty black and white. You know, this is a sin, this is not. It's very simple. It's like this is correct, this is wrong, and there's no questions needs to be asked. It's simple in a way, you know. So losing all that, along with the fear, so losing all my purpose, all my connections, all my belongings, my faith, opening my eyes to the world. Like, you know, what are we going to do now? Like, is you know, for a 16-year-old, it's scary, you know, and it's overwhelming, and it's, you know, where do we start? And, you know, what if they're right? because it's not a one day to the other process of coming out of indoctrination. It takes time. So there's a lot of, what if, they're saying that, and you do things that you're not conscious of, and moving into to what CI did for me. Like I'll talk more about that, about all the inner core beliefs that CI and Gabor's work, compassionate inquiry, helped me uncover. Like,
Okay, so you've talked about living in that community, loss of identity, substance abuse, anxiety, low self-esteem, maybe they're right, doubt in yourself.
mm.
And yeah, I'm wondering, when finalizing that part of your life, moving away from that community, what were you believing about yourself? What were the core beliefs that were there?
I mean, no doubt that I'm no better than I can perform or than I can produce. If I can be of value to you, then that defines my value. Like I had
Okay,
no value without that. I'm just a waste of space. I'm there to be of service only, and not service of myself, but for other people. So,
that
uh,
kind of hit me quite hard when you said that. Joakim, I'm wondering how that landed with you to hear yourself saying that. I am of no value.
well, it doesn't ring very true anymore, to be fair.
Okay, okay, yeah.
And it's not something. I mean, that took me a long time to figure out. It's in the last 5 years that has actually landed for me. I always knew that growing up in that environment affected me. Like I knew that from day one as I left. I wonder how this is gonna play out. How is it gonna happen? But it's not until I found compassionate inquiry that I realized that, oh, these behaviors and those behaviors and these beliefs and that, and what are emotions actually? What do you mean? How do you feel? The first time somebody asked me, how do you feel? I got very angry, and they said, well, that's a feeling, anger. You can be angry, and I was like, okay, all right, so I'm angry then, great. I was 40 years old at that point, naming my first emotion.
Congratulations. I'm think that some people don't ever get there. So to do it at 40. So Joachim, I paused you and we skipped, and we're kind of getting a picture of the world that you had moved through as a young person. We're kind of starting to get a picture of how you were carrying these beliefs, perceptions about yourself, about the world at 15, 16 years of age. You had gone back to the elders of your community and say, I'm out of here, I'm leaving. And then you were about to talk about, at 16 years of age, I experienced my first class A drug. What
Mm.
did that do for you?
Right, so it's took me a while to figure that out. Also, I was in the rehab, reading in Gabor's book what actually happened. How did I get here? Like how does it serve me? What do they do for me, the
Mm.
drugs? And it's vitality, and the possibility to just look at the world and see, I can actually do whatever I want. I can go and study, I can go and do this, or I can travel, or I can do anything that I want. And I'm gonna start there. So I don't know how to. I think vitality is the closest word to that. To just be like, whew, I'm actually alive. It made me more present, which is kind of like the opposite of what it actually does. One might say,
Oxymoronic, I think
yeah.
is the word. Yeah.
So it made me present.
Mm.
Like, okay, I made a lot of good friends, and I started to live. Not in fear.
I also hear a word that you're not saying, but it's kind of coming through for me. Confidence.
Mm. Yeah, totally.
That you had a confidence in yourself,
Yeah.
that drugs helped you with that low self-esteem and no purpose and no identity. That the class A drugs give you confidence around who you were, possibility, what you could do, what you wanted to do, friends, presence, vitality. They all sound like pretty cool things to want.
Yeah, you know, that's what I also figured out, asking myself in the rehab, reading in this book. So that's what I wanted, and that's what I needed. and I looked through my options, so I was 16 years old. I could get a job and save up money and go to a psychologist, or I could take drugs. My father was an intravenous drug user until he overdosed. My stepfather was an alcoholic, and my mom was in a sect. So there was not that many adults or reasonable role models to ask, what am I supposed to do here? At some point, I was in the social services because of some kind of drug related thing, and they were, talking to me, oh, why are you taking drugs? And I was like, yeah, I left this sect. Can you help me with that? Can I have a psychologist or some kind of help with this? Oh, we're really sorry. We don't really provide that. Okay. So, I mean, looking at that, the options that I've had, I don't think there is a lot of, well, I wasn't. When I was 16, I did not get a job and saved up to get a psychologist because it was not on the table. So the only options that I had was to take the drugs, and enjoy. Also, there is another inner core belief that was present at that time for many years, and is that the world might end any given moment. Do you want to have a whiskey at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning? Yeah, why not? Because it's very easy to say yes to whatever craziness.
Yeah, I read a word that you used, apocalyptic, that if the apocalypse is coming in 20 minutes or 2 hours or 2 days or 2 weeks, why would you not have a whiskey or a class A substance?
Yeah, or I mean, or in any kind of impulsive, let's go and travel there, let's go and do that, let's get, it's just like, yeah, let's do it now. Why not? Now, let's do it. So I don't know. There's this interesting thing about spontaneity and impulsivity, which I'm still not sure about. They say that spontaneity is better, and I think this was more of an impulse driven. But the impulse was like, let's smile. We might die any moment, so let's do whatever fun thing we can do.
Hmm.
And for me, in those situations, it was often to do with drugs and alcohol.
Joachim, you talked a first class A drug at 16.
Mm.
You talked about naming your first emotion at 40. And you talked about, a dependence on alcohol and drugs for 24 years. And it's okay not to answer this. How bad did it get?
That's super okay. Yeah, I mean, the worst, the end of it. I mean, in 24 years, you go up and down. I did all the things that people talk about. I changed location, I changed relationships, I changed drugs, I changed this and that, and I controlled them left, center, right. And then, let's take only this drug for a month and then just that drug for a month and this. And I tried all of those things until I gave up and realized that I need to take drugs. So I'm just going to take them and I'm not going to be ashamed about it. I'm just going to take them. And that's it, because they served me somehow. And I didn't think that much about it. I was just like, I'm just going to, yeah, call me an addict if you want. I don't care. Like, I'm just going to do it. And towards the end of it, it brought me to standing on a train track, waiting for the train to come and end it. And I woke up in that train track 2 nights in a row, being somewhere else and not remembering how I got there. And I just wake up waiting for the first train. It's not that far from here where I live. And realizing that, I'm never gonna be able to get out of this. I'm never gonna be able to live without drugs. And they're not working anymore. They bring me here to this train track. Every time I start taking them, I end up here, wanting to end it. So, I need to quit, or I need to die, because I can't do that to my children. I don't want my children to have this. In the way that I thought about it in that moment, I don't want my children to have this failure. There's some guy who's a drug addict who comes on and off, and I had this image of something of this kind of life of wanting to not take drugs but still taking them, and so on and so on. So the first step out of there was okay, I'm not going to do that to my children. I owe them to try at least once to quit properly. Like, I need to do it. I need to try once. But if I fail, well, then I can go back here. So, yeah, to that point.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Joachim.
Mm.
And again, for anyone that's listening and tuning into this conversation, We get this is big. We get it's emotional, and I'm really honored that you're being so vulnerable and honest and sharing with us, Joakim. So let's, if it's okay with you. So here we have, and we didn't even talk about all of your childhood. I heard you give glimpses of it. You said your father was an intravenous drug user, your stepdad was an alcoholic, your mum was in a cult, moving through a lot of fear for a child, fear of God, fear of your community. You talked about lack of purpose, low self-esteem, starting to finding class A drugs. A while ago, you actually said, substances were my savior, which is a really interesting, again, an interesting way of looking at it through this lens of compassion, that who knows what might have happened had you not have had substances to give you vitality, possibility, presence, friends, to live a life not in fear. And Gabor talks about that addiction starts in pain or starts in fear and ends the same way. And sometimes in the middle, there's some fun. So let's talk about then. Here we have a guy waking up twice on a train track, waiting for the first train in the morning. What age were you then, Joakim?
So this is 2019 in November. So
that's pretty recent past.
yeah.
Yeah. And talk to me then. What happened? You said I'll give myself one chance. I owe it to my kids. And did you go then and sign up for a rehab thing, or were you what happened there?
I was convinced that it wasn't going to work, but I felt that I needed to try once. And I only saw a future where I'll be missing drugs for the rest of my life every day, because it's just like I'm not going to be able to control the use. I'm not going to, this is clearly not working. So I'm just going to have to miss them then. And that's it. That's with the mindset that I had. So I went to see my mom, who told me a few weeks earlier than that. She told me many times through the years, but she actually also told me that I would need to leave the house where I was staying, because she had to pay the rent, because I didn't manage to pay the rent for the last 2 years. So she was like, I can't do this anymore. You need to. I found a letter actually that she wrote the other day where she asks me to leave. So I went to ask her, okay, a few weeks ago you talked about some rehab that you found. Where is it? Like, let's go. And it was the latest number she dialed in her phone. There you go. Call them now. And well, I spoke to them and they said, yeah, you can come here on Tuesday. This was a Thursday. And then she took a bank loan for me to be able to go to this place. And I went there and I spent 12 weeks in there.
That's a pretty quick turnaround. That's a pretty quick decision. That's a fairly drastic change in life circumstances.
Yeah, it was literally instant. It's like, it was just, I was so tired. I was so tired. I had a few epiphanies kind of thing a couple of weeks before that. I was standing on a underground platform in the south of Stockholm, and very kind of high and not looking my greatest, let's say. And a homeless guy walks up to me and he goes, "Hey man, have you seen in the container over there by the food store? There's a lot of sandwiches in there. Like you can just take them. That's nice. Like they're nice fresh sandwiches." And I'm standing there looking at him and I'm wondering, why the fuck are you telling me this? Like I know a lot of people that are homeless. I've spoken to them my whole life with my father as a, like I speak to people from anywhere, and so on. But why is he talking to me like I'm one of them? And then another guy comes up and he goes, "Hey, have you seen the container over there? You've got sandwiches and that." And I go, "What is going on? Why are they talking to me like I'm one of them? What is going on?" And then it dawned on me that, what's the entry fee, or what's the definition of a homeless drug addict? How do you become one? How do you get accepted? And it's like, well, when they think you're the same. And I never felt that in that way before, and that struck me. And initially, it was such a relief. It was just like, okay, I don't need to lie. I don't need to take any responsibilities. I don't need to do nothing anymore. I can just, I don't have to do anything. I can just do this. I can just be high. And a few minutes later, it's like, so all right, what am I going to have to do to maintain this? Okay, I'm going to need a copious amount of drugs. So that's going to be on the to-do list for each day to get more drugs. What else? All right, I'm not going to be able to see my kids. And I'm not going to be able to see any of my friends. And I'm not going to be, and then this is in about 15 minutes, this is happening. It's all of this. And then there is a Chris Christopherson song that starts the lyrics, freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. And that is like, it hit me. And then I don't really recall much after that, but that was a few weeks before. So I had these things kind of coming up, and like you need to, some kind of internal play that was going on.
Thank you, Joakim, for sharing that story too. I'm really curious, and I know we're going to talk about compassionate inquiry and how that work has helped you, and how through being helped, mostly at your own effort, being helped, but you did the work. So coming from that point, coming from rehab, coming from getting Gabor's book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Close Encounters with Addiction, as you sat in that rehab and then looked backwards across your life, what were the things that you were needing to forgive yourself for? What were the things that you were needing to bring compassion to yourself around?
So this is like the most incredible part about reading that book. So I was there 30 days in, all the anxiety, really high. Oh, I did this to my children. I did that to my relationships, to my mother, and shame and guilt. And as I was reading that, what do you get from it? What does it do for you? And I realized that I spent my entire life chasing that freedom, that vitality that it gave me, that possibility. And I realized that, man, there's nothing wrong with that. So I have tears kind of welling up now.
Can we take a pause, Joakim? Again, sorry, just there. Maybe I'll ask you to say that again. So I realized that for most of my life, I was chasing possibility, vitality, confidence, and friends.
Freedom.
Freedom, that's the word you used. Thank you. Possibility, vitality, and freedom. And you said, there's nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that. And for anyone listening who finds himself wanting freedom or warmth or vitality or understanding or to be seen, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, thank you for that reminder. That's really important.
So a lot of the guilt, it shifted gear to like, okay, well, I can do different now. It's like I woke up on Christmas Eve in 2019. I came there in November, so I've been there 5 weeks after having read Gabor's book. Still wondering, what kind of other emotions, whatever other stuff is buried. And I also started to listen to everything with Gabor I could find in YouTube. In that, after I did that in the rehab, just like slightly addictively, maybe. Obsessive, like, okay, I'm going to listen to this. But it's a 4-hour talk about this book. Great, I'm going to listen to that. All of the stuff that Gabor talks about and that we do in compassionate inquiry, beliefs, where they come from, and all of this stuff, it was kind of there floating around in my conscience, I would say. So I woke up on the 24th of December. Before I opened my eyes, I could just sense how these tears were kind of pushed out of my system, like these very thick tears that stays in your eyes. It was just like it was almost like a sound. And I thought, all right, great. So today I'm not even going to be able to open my eyes before I start crying. Amazing. Super great. And then I realized that the day that they expelled me from Jehovah's Witnesses, or, the day that they read it out to the congregation, from the day it was official that I was no longer a Jehovah's Witness at my own request, but from that day, that was also the 24th of December, 1996. And all the grief from having lost all my friends, some of whom I recovered later, but having that grief came, and it was just like a moment of just a clarity and a peace, and it's like, oh, I've been running, running and running and running and running and running, and now I don't need to run anymore.
So Joachim, the question, again, what I'm hearing, the question that I asked you was, what did you need to forgive yourself for? And the beautiful answer that you gave me was that when you finally understood yourself and what was driving your behavior, you didn't have anything to forgive yourself for.
Yeah.
Because you understood yourself.
Yeah, and then I could feel it. It's not about just reading about it. I was also I can add to coming to that rehab. I also realized that this is, my mom, she's not a billionaire, I'm not going to be able to come back here. This is, this is it now. Like I got to nail this. So I threw myself into it because I was tired, I didn't want to die, and I was tired, and I knew that this is the only chance I have. So I had little breathing meditation groups in my room, even though you're not allowed to go to each other's room in the rehab. And come to my room at 7 o'clock in the morning, and we'll do a Kundalini exercise, and this kind of thing. So I was just like, I was full on in it, which is probably dangerous at some point also, because it could have gone the other way. It could have been too much. I don't know. Like, I'm not recommending anybody to do anything that they don't feel like doing, But I was, let's do this now. So a lot of things came, and Gabor's words, they made so much sense. I could understand why my dad decided to continue with drugs when he got a heart problem. Why would he choose to continue to inject amphetamines when you have a heart problem? Like, who does that? And it was just like, well, I get it now. I understand. My stepdad, my grandfather, it just started to make sense of it. Everything, my whole life started to make sense, along with a physical. There's nothing wrong with me.
That's beautiful, Joachim. That's really beautiful. This idea of forgiveness, it fascinates me. Is forgiveness a state? Is it an action? Is it something we do? Is it something we receive? I asked you a question about forgiveness, and you said, well, I kind of realized I didn't have to forgive myself. And then you just talked about your father, your stepfather, and your grandfather. And you realized as well, you said, I get it. And I hear you say that when I understood myself, when I understood the environment that I grew up in, when I understood what was happening for me, I then understood what was happening for my father, my stepfather, and my grandfather. Funnily, I'm asking about forgiveness, and what you're saying is, when I understand myself and my father and my stepfather, my grandfather, that is the state of forgiveness. There was nothing to forgive. Forgiveness has been achieved. That state of forgiveness has been achieved. And I love this idea of forgiveness as a state rather than an action. What I hear is, when you had healed yourself enough, you attained a state of forgiveness where you were able to look at other people, namely your father, your stepfather, and your grandfather, and see them through a different light because you had reached a state of forgiveness. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think forgiveness is not something that you can give to anybody else. It's always about yourself. It's always about me.
Joachim, all that we've just talked about, this state of non-judgment, being with people, reaching a state of forgiveness, understanding yourself, being present to yourself, knowing that nothing that you did was wrong, that there's nothing wrong with you. That must be a very powerful set of tools or beliefs to take into the work that you do today.
Something happens in me when you say, "Oh, that's a powerful tool to bring." Like I don't know. It's about being oneself, and not to be afraid. I mean, if I can just be me, that's the tool. It's not an external, set of techniques. Or you can do breathing techniques, or you can do, but for me, compassionate inquiry is a lot about that. It's about me being me fully in a session with somebody, or talking to somebody in whatever setting that is. So it's the same for being a father, or a husband, or a son, or in all of those, it's about me being me. And it's the same with all these clients. So it's not even I don't think it's a tool. It's just it's a state of being. And it's tricky, I suppose, to speak about. Yes, so Kevin, are you present now? I am very present now. It's funny that, but but that's it. To continuously remain present. I mean, it's a tricky thing to talk about this, right? Because now we lost it. Now we're not present because we're talking about But anyway, so to just check in, what's going on for me? Here is a client talking about this and that and this and this. What happens for me? And and am I still? It's I don't know how to describe it.
Joakim, the reason it's difficult to describe is because it's an experience.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is to be with you. I know you're saying this with all humility and being humble. To be with you, engaged in compassionate inquiry, is experiential. It's how we feel and being in that presence. It's not what we know. It's not the tools. It's just being with another human being.
Yeah, maybe I should add then that it's not just me. It might have people like Kevin, for example. No, but with anybody that you work with, human to human, for any human working with any modality anywhere, I think that's the most important piece.
Yeah, thank you. Joakim, I'm conscious of our time. I'd love to quickly ask you just another couple of questions, and then get you to help me round things up a little bit. So again, someone out there listening, struggling with whatever they're struggling with in their life, be that substance abuse, behavioral addictions, whatever it might be. And maybe they find themselves on a train track, 2 weeks in a row. What can they do for themselves? What's their next move?
I don't think there is an easy answer to that question, but talk to someone.
Okay.
Share where you're at. What's going on for you? If you have that, to whoever is possible to listen. Because for me, the killer is I'm alone with this. It's just me. But we're not alone.
It's a beautiful thing that the healing of addiction quite often is in connection. And one last thing then, Joakim, if you could teach the world one thing, what would you teach them?
About teaching our children's from the start, maybe in school or in nursery or whatever, preferably at home, but that it's okay to be angry, sad, afraid, that it's okay. And to start teaching our children that.
Yeah, I wish someone had taught me that.
Yeah.
Joakim, it has been an absolute delight chatting to you. A privilege. You take care of yourself, my friend.
Thank you, Kevin.
The Gifts of Trauma is a weekly podcast that features personal stories of trauma healing, transformation, and the gifts revealed on the path to authenticity. Please note, this podcast is for informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for personal therapy or a DIY formula for self-therapy. We'd like to thank you for being here today, and we'd also like to thank our guests, as well as Gabor Mate, Sataram Kaur, and the Compassionate Inquiry admin team, marketing team, and podcast team. Please join us again next week to hear more stories of transformation and healing through Compassionate Inquiry.